Here we are at Kennesaw Mountain, where a major Civil War battle was fought. The Civil War was fought over control of territory between the North and South of the United States. Today we're going to talk about political power and territoriality. I'm Mr. Coulter, and this is Human Geography. Today we continue our discussion of political geography with topic 4.3, political power and territoriality. Political power is expressed geographically, and we can see that as the control over people, land, and resources out in the world. So let's give some examples for each of these. In terms of control over people, governments exert political power over people who live in territories. So we can see that even in elected democracies, where we choose the people who represent us, they make those laws, and then we see those laws implemented. So even in a situation where you elect the people, they exhibit political power over you. So you can't steal or go above the speed limit or do things like that because we've created a society where there's power that enforces laws over us. That's an example of political power over people. Land is when a government controls a territory and ensures the protection and safety of that land. So they're willing to defend that land. That's an example of political power over land. Resources is like the control of resources. So wars have been fought over things like oil or water, those natural resources that people need. So the example that I always give is the Gulf War that was fought between Kuwait and Iraq. That was fought over oil because Iraq felt like Kuwait was taking oil that was underground from them. And we'll talk about that when we talk about boundaries a little bit more. Some of the things that happened as a result of this political power are things like neocolonialism, shatter belts, and choke points, which are all things that we'll get into now. But we see some of the major political battles that were fought in the 1900s when the Soviet Union and the United States were fighting what we called a Cold War, which was a battle of ideas, and they were exerting political power onto different groups through that time. So we'll talk about that a lot more this unit. So let's get into our first one, which is neocolonialism. So neocolonialism is the economic control that more developed countries are sometimes believed to have over less developed countries. Remember that MDCs, more developed countries, and LDCs are less developed countries. So we see this a lot in the world now as we've gotten away from traditional colonialism. Remember that traditional colonialism was the actual takeover and control of territory where you use the resources of those people. We talked about that with the Great British Empire, where they controlled colonies all over the world and took resources from them. That's an example of colonialism. Neocolonialism is the economic control over different areas. A great example of this now is China uses their economic power in sub-Saharan Africa to influence the governments. So they use a lot of political power and what we call soft power in order to influence African governments. In Kenya, they give a lot of money to build roads, and they do a lot of investing in Kenya so that they can push Kenya towards pro-Chinese goals. So there's examples of that where you use your money out in the world to push those governments to your goals. So the withholding of that money would be a threat against them not listening to what you want to do. We saw this with the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s, where the U.S. used their influence in the Caribbean and Latin America in order to see their goals of farming. They called them banana republics, where we had farming goals that we wanted and changed their government policy to help us with that. And here is a political cartoon of colonialism versus neocolonialism. You can see in this one it says, "I claim this land in the name of His Majesty." That's an example of real colonialism. But in neocolonialism, they say, "I structurally adjust this land in the name of economic growth." So it's saying we're using our economic influence to change this place. So another one is choke points. Choke points are a strategic strait or canal which can be closed or blocked to stop sea traffic. So an example of this is the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal was dug out during the time period of Teddy Roosevelt's presidency. And before it, everyone had to sail all the way around South America. But then the Panama Canal was dug, and it allowed people to go right through the middle of Central America and skip that to be able to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And they are extremely valuable points because you can tax them or hold political power over those who need to use them. So these choke points are strategic points because you can block them, and that would stop sea traffic. And it really helps you with taxing and things like that because people need to be able to use sea lanes. So let's look at some of the major choke points around the world. I want you to write down any that you see. We see the biggest in the world is the Malaccan Strait in the Indian Ocean. We also see the Strait of Hormuz, and then the Suez Canal that goes from like the Indian Ocean into the Mediterranean. All of those are important choke points that stop people from being able to trade through. That's always been why Istanbul, such it used to be called Constantinople, was so important to the world back in trading through the Silk Road and everything, was because of its importance both on land and sea in trading through. In the Panama Canal, you can see to a lesser degree in the Western Hemisphere. So that brings us to Shatter Belts. A Shatter Belt is a region trapped between two larger powers who are fighting. So an example of this is Poland. Through the world wars, Poland has been stuck between the major world powers. So they were always stuck between Russia and Germany. The problem with that is as people are fighting, you're going to be stuck between that conflict. So in both wars, Poland was invaded as a way to get to the other. And they ended up splitting up Poland during the world wars because of that. So Shatter Belt is a region trapped between two larger powers that are fighting. A cultural Shatter Belt are regions where different cultures meet and come in conflict against each other. A great example of this is the border between Sudan and South Sudan, which split off in 2011 because Sudan is a Muslim majority and South Sudan is Christian. And so it was a place of conflict where those two countries meet. That's what they split off. So you can see right here, this is the example where they created two different states of Sudan and South Sudan. And then we also have right here the Eastern European boundary and then the old Soviet boundary and the way that those were shatter belts as they fought over in world, that like being ground between two different major powers that were fighting. And that takes us to territoriality. Territoriality is the attempt by an individual or group to affect, influence, or control people, phenomena, relationships by delimiting and asserting control over a geographic area. That is a very wordy definition. But basically what territoriality is a group or person trying to control people and a thing in a place. So it's trying to control a geographic area. Territoriality. So here is a drawing that can help you understand territoriality. So this example right here is of people not liking unassigned desks. So people like to know which one's their desk. And if somebody comes in and sits in Kathy's desk where she has a pic of her kids, she will be very upset and cause a conflict over it. So we see that humans naturally, a lot of times, like to have a place and control that place, to know where it is. It's the reason that we like own property and want to have a home that you can call your own. Territoriality is this desire to control and have your own place. So that happens on a national scale, is countries are trying to control and keep their territory together and succinct. That is it for topic 4.3, political power and territoriality. We learned a lot about the important phenomenon like neocolonialism, choke points, and shatter belts that define our current political map, as well as territoriality, which is people's desire to control a territory. We're going to take these terms we've learned in the first three topics and apply them to the boundaries and disputes and problems we see throughout the world and conflicts that come from all of that. That's just one step in our journey to better understand our world. I'm Mr. Coulter, and that was Human Geography.